Hello and welcome to The Thing About Golf, a podcast series from Golf Australia magazine that seeks an answer to that unanswerable question. What is it about golf that gets people so hooked? My name's Rod Murray, and every couple of weeks I'm joined by someone from the world of golf to explore this bizarre phenomenon. From players to administrators, writers and those who are in the business of golf, all of our guests have one thing in common. For them, the game is much, much more than just a game. If you've been with us for a while, you'll know that professional golfers are probably overrepresented on our guest list. And when you think about it, that's not really a surprise. Not only are those who are obsessed with the game more likely to pursue it as a career, but they're often the people we already know a little bit about, thanks to their on-course achievements, and human curiosity means we want to know more. Our guest today ticks some of those boxes, though not all. Her name will be familiar to anybody with an interest in the history of the game in Australia. After all, she won the Australian Women's Amateur 3 times and was a member of the first Australian team to win what's now known as the Espirito Santo Trophy, the World Cup of amateur golf. But beyond that, most of us, me included, know almost nothing of Jane Locke. An LPGA Tour player from 1980 to 1986, her professional record never really reached the heights of her amateur achievements, but her contribution to the game in Australia should and cannot be overlooked. Jane is my favourite type of interview guest because she pulls no punches. She calls it as she sees it, and whether or not you agree with her, you always know that her view has been formed with integrity. So sit back and enjoy what I found to be a fascinating chat with one of Australia's best, Jane Locke. Jane, terrific of you to take some time. Really do appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to today's chat. Thanks very much for this.
My pleasure, Rod.
Well, you say that now. Let's see how we're going in an hour a bit.
Good point.
When we're all done. Jane, the podcast is called The Thing About Golf. So that's our jumping off point. What's the thing about golf for Jane Locke?
Oh, it's many and varied over the years. It was an obsession when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Then it became sort of a passion in terms of just playing and teaching. And then it sort of waned to the point where, look, there's lots of other things to do and I find I got a chance to do them. Mm-hmm. Not that I won't go back, but I'm not playing much at all. Well, you can't here.
No, that's
just you can in twos with masks, which everyone says is very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Jane's in Melbourne for those who might remember. And of course,
about that.
They've had a golf lockdown for some time down there. Is that what's brought on this sort of less enthusiastic attitude, or has that been happening for a while for you?
No, I've been like that for a couple of years, just because I've worked all my life, like most people, and you get to a stage where you suddenly say, I don't have to. You get the opportunity to do things that you couldn't do before, you couldn't do as much. And also having a choice.
And, of course, for most people, that thing that they go off to do when they retire is golf, Jane. But, of course, when you've played golf all your life, you need to look for something else. What are those interests for you?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. A nurse, when they retire, they don't go to nursing for a hobby. No. So a lot of golf people like myself, it's the hobby. You know, you still like it, but you just need a break. Yeah,
indeed. So what are your other hobbies then? What does a golfer do? Because I suspect for a lot of people who've played golf for most of their lives and at a high level as you have, there probably hasn't been a lot of hobby development on the side along the way through.
No, well, I've developed a passion for Asian cooking, but I read a lot, and that's born out of what I used to do when I travelled. You had hardcover books, no iPads, no iPhones. So you read at airports, hotels, on the plane. And I still do that. I think that's something I've got from my mother. She was a voracious reader, and I would read about 3 or 4 books a week, I suppose.
Wow, what sort of books?
Oh, I'm just one of these escape people, murder mysteries. Mm-hmm.
Let's bring it back to golf, Jane. I know shamefully little about you and your career. And as I said to you when we were teeing up this interview, I think many people in golf are probably in the same boat. Yourself, Lindy Goggin and Edwina Kennedy won a world championship, Australia's first women's world teams championship. And I suspect that we probably all recognise your names from that. But that's about as much as we know, and I don't think that that's right. So we want to explore a bunch of stuff today about the Jane Locke story. So let's go right back to the beginning. I listened to a really interesting oral history interview you did, I think it was about 12 years ago now, for the National Library. It's available on the internet if anybody wants to go and have a listen to it. And it was quite interesting the way you got started in golf. It wasn't sort of your first pick in terms of sport, was it?
No, it wasn't.
So tell us that story. How old were you?
14.
And
we had a holiday house at Point Lonsdale, and in the middle of winter, you couldn't really, when it was pouring with rain, you couldn't really go a few walks, you couldn't play tennis, you couldn't go swimming, you couldn't do anything. But my father disappeared off to golf every day, and, he'd come back 7 o'clock at night wearing his sunglasses in the pitch dark so you know what they were doing after golf. But he was playing a sport. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, if you can play a sport in that sort of weather, I'm in. Yeah. So he set up an old blanket on the tea tree clothesline we had out the back, and I thought he was being very generous, giving me a brand new forward, but it turns out that he couldn't hit it, so he gave it to me.
It's a perfect club to pass down.
Exactly. Men's length, men's weight, thick grips.
Yeah, indeed.
But, I had a real passion for it as soon as I started doing that.
Because you were all other sports, weren't you? You did tennis and netball and hockey, everything. You played everything, didn't you, prior to that?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, after learning how to hit into the blanket out the back, I'm sure that didn't keep you particularly engaged for a particularly long time. What was the journey to actual golf like then for you?
Well, it's funny. Girls' golf was much bigger, and there was a good system run by Bertuccini, who was the doyen of women's golf of her era, back in the 50s and 60s. And I used to play at Point Lonsdale, and they used to have golf camp at Anglesey run by her and all the volunteers just before Christmas every year, and that was for any handicap or no handicap. So I went to that, and you graduate to the Flinders camp, which was held in the middle of winter at Flinders, which is right on the coast, if you had a handicap of sorts, and you had to be invited to that one.
Right.
Because we used to stay at the St Andrews Guest House right on the first hole, which is no longer there because burnt down by fire. And when I was 14 and just starting, my father being a member of Huntingdale, I couldn't join Huntingdale at that stage because they had I think it was 18 years of age or 16 years of age to be starting as a member or to join. So they just changed the rules to let me in because Berta was quite a dominant figure and they listened to her. Mm-hmm. So I joined Huntingdale at 14, and I was already a member at Lonsdale. And at Lonsdale I could walk up the road with my bag and buggy and play by myself, and I had a couple of really nice old friends, and they're probably younger than me now, that used to take me and play with me. But that wasn't enough for me because they didn't like playing in the heat. And when you're young, the heat doesn't bother you.
No.
It doesn't exist.
Nothing bothers you, does it, when you're young?
Nah. I look at people now and I think, oh, God, they're mad. But I was one of them, and I used to go and play. I know one time I played Lonsdale, played 72 holes in one day on my own, of course. But there weren't the crowds then, so you could do it. And it was obviously summertime. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was ridiculously obsessed.
If you did that in this day and age, Jane, you would be doing it for charity, and you would tweet out and Instagram about 1,000 photos of yourself doing it as you did, because you'd be raising money. There is actually a world's longest day challenge that is exactly that, 72 holes in a day.
Oh, is it?
Yes, kids around the world. I think it raises money for skin cancer awareness, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
I think it's usually around this time of year. So, yeah, people will go through and play 72 holes a day, but not people like you were then, people like we are now, playing 72 holes a day, which is a bit more of an achievement.
Look, I only did it for myself. I didn't do it for anything else or anyone.
Yeah, indeed. Now, around that time, I think you ended up going to that Flinders camp once you got a handicap, and if I'm not mistaken, you said on this oral history piece, you dropped your handicap by a staggering sum in about a week.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, you go out and you play your Stableford or whatever, and remember I was 15 or 14, I can't remember exactly, and you put your card in at the end, and Berta had come marching out with her cronies who was running the camp and say, "Now, who marked your card?" I'm going, "So-and-so." "Now, you sure this is right?" I said, "Yeah." And I think I had net 60, or I had net 57 or 59 or something.
Wow.
I mean, I really have to look it up, but that's why she was questioning it, because that's ridiculous.
Of course it is.
But I'd only just got my handicap under the car headlights of my father's Falcon or whatever it was on the 18th green of Point Lonsdale the week before that camp, because I had to do that to get my last card in for handicap. So that gave me a 36 handicap, I think, and I left that camp on, I've been 19 or something.
Wow.
I should have really looked it up before I spoke to you. Sorry about that.
Doesn't really matter. Here's the thing, Jane. You could say whatever you wanted, because I don't think anybody else is going to go looking it up or they'll know. So I think that meshes with what you said 12 years ago. So I'm going to say that's probably about right. It's an interesting time in golf, isn't it, that beginner? And you see this. I used to cover an event called I think it was called the Lexus Cup at the time, then it became the Genesis Cup, which Golf Link used to run. And it was a sort of an average, long story short. But I used to have to interview the winners each week. And it wasn't uncommon to come across young kids who'd just taken up the game. And there's that extraordinary period at the start, isn't there, where you can go from 27 to 15 in the space of weeks if you play enough golf, because your game is improving so rapidly. In many ways, it's probably the best time of golf, isn't it? Because the better you get, the harder it is to get any better. The journey really slows down, doesn't it? So. Yep.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And also golf courses were easier in those days. The equipment wasn't as good, so there's a balance there, I suppose. But they were definitely easier.
Yeah, we'll come to all the equipment and some other things a little bit later, because I'd be interested to get your views on some of that. You've played it at every level of the game all the way through. So and you've played through a time period where we've seen enormous change in equipment. So that makes your views of more value than some other views of people who've never seen or played with at any level equipment of a bygone era. So I'm guessing you're obsessed at this stage. And what is golf to you? Is it just a recreation? Is it something you're considering you might do? What did the women's golf landscape look like? Was there press about women playing golf? Were there women golf stars for you to look up to locally or internationally? Can you recall?
Yeah. I'm a reader, as I said. So when I got into the golf, I was fascinated. I wanted to know who famous golfers were, women. And there was a very famous Queenslander by the name of Judith Percy. And she won the Australian Championship I don't know how many times. But the story behind her was that she worked on a sheep farm and she lugged sheep on her shoulders around the farm all the time. And that's what she did to make enough money to be able to go and play in these things, because the people like the Bertoccinis, the Bettine Burgesses and these people, they were all born into money, so they didn't have to work. So, but because of them, people like me could get into the game because they actually supported and encouraged women. The hierarchy of golf was always very British, which didn't appeal to me. But look, in those days, when I was playing 14, 15 through to the early 20s, the Melbourne Age and the Sun, the two big papers down here, they would cover all of our tournaments. There would be front page, back page photos of myself and other females. It was big, big news. I mean, my mother kept scrapbooks and I only had them out the other month or so ago because someone wanted to come round and look up the archives of them. And I couldn't even believe myself, because I hadn't looked at them for 20 years, the amount of coverage we actually got. And, you know, you had Don Lawrence and Trevor Grant, Peg McMahon, and they're all top writers, Don having named Jack Nicklaus the Golden Bear. So they were covering our tournaments. Even the Marram Cup, which is a 3-4 day event down at Barwon Heads, it's just sort of a local thing, the press would come to that. Now, these days, women's golf barely cracks a mention. And it's sad.
It was a different media time, wasn't it?
Yes.
At a time when newspapers dominated, and being an old newspaper person myself, they needed to be filled.
Yes.
And and particularly when newspapers were a much bigger item where there was lots and lots and lots of ads, the number of ads would dictate the number of pages. So if you're the only game in town for advertisers, or the biggest game in town, which newspapers were for such a long time, then you had lots of pages to fill. And so that's exactly what you did. And it was to the betterment of everybody, I think. You could find a lot more stuff in newspapers. Now, of course, we have the bottomless pit that is digital media, the internet.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to be heard because you can put as much content on there as you like, and you're competing with the entire world for attention. What do you recall about your relationship in that case in those times with the press? That's a thing that's changed enormously in professional golf, certainly with amateur golf, where as you say, there's not much in the way of coverage. What was the relationship between the players and the press? I'm guessing you probably grew up knowing Don Lawrence, probably on a first-name basis.
Yeah, Don and I were good friends, but he had the personality to be good friends with everyone. Peg McMahon, we had a hot and cold, but that's because I'm female and so's she. And also I'm not the goody two-shoes, I never was, and I speak my mind, and, you know, that goes down about as well as a lead balloon sometimes, so that didn't matter. Look, Peg and I, we'd have dinner, we'd do speaking engagements, same with Don when he was alive. We'd be going to his place for dinner on a regular basis. So you actually had a friendship with some of them. Tom Ramsey, I can remember overseas, he was covering our Commonwealth team matches, and, you know, the whole stack of them. But, you know, these days, if someone wants an interview, they sort of do it as you say. It's on the phone. It's not in person. So you can't get to know people, to me, on a phone. No,
it's a very different sort of a thing, isn't it? It's one of the tragedies of the lockdown. When we started this podcast, one of the commitments I tried to make was that absolutely, as much as possible, the interviews would be done in person, because interviews are better when they're done in person.
I agree.
And we were going quite nicely with all of that until March, obviously, and then all sort of interviews in person kind of stopped, which was a real shame. Because I agree with you.
It's a shame, but it's a challenge for you.
Yeah, well, there's a dynamic that you can't recreate on the phone, isn't there? When you're in the room together, there's body language and tone and inflection, things that you miss. You can't help but miss when you're talking through a device that you can pick up on when you're in a room together. So we'll probably redo this episode after the whole COVID thing one day when we can sit in the same room, and that'll be nice.
That would be very nice.
It would be fantastic. As things are developing at this time for you, Jane, clearly you've shown some ability, probably some above average ability. You've attracted probably a little bit of attention. Is your attitude towards the game changing? And have you yet... A young player in your position at the age of 14, 15, 16 today probably would have been playing for a few more years already, it's most likely.
Yes, that's true.
But they'd already be thinking to themselves, LPGA, world domination, lots of money, maybe one day a private plane if we can get to that sort of level. Was that the sort of thing that or was it still just a game and something you were doing for a bit of fun at the time?
No, I've always maintained that it was just a game. I wanted to play it. I was trying to get better, but for myself, not... Championships didn't mean anything initially at all until I didn't win a couple. So, then I thought, I do want to win those. So, but no, it was purely because I liked doing it.
I wonder whether that's healthier. Hard to say. It might be different for different people, mightn't it?
Well, it is to me, because I see a lot of the AIS, VIS, kids these days. I know a couple of them quite well, and their attitude is it's a business. They're planning long term, like you just said, which, look, there's nothing wrong with that.
Everything encourages it in this day and age, doesn't it, Jane? Including the amateur system is all built around creating elite players who will go on unquestionably to be professional. In fact, it would be more of a shock if an elite amateur player announced they weren't turning professional.
Yeah, which is the case with Lindy and Edwina. They both... could have turned professional, and I have no doubt they would have done very well. But they chose otherwise, which is a different era again. But I think the trouble with this boosting and pushing of the elite players, on one hand, that's great to get the elite, but it's at the expense of the grassroots. And that's what I'm seeing.
In what ways? So governance of the game is obviously a major issue. Golf Australia has gone through some real upheaval in recent years since becoming Golf Australia. This whole push for one golf, New South Wales not a part of it, Western Australia not a part of it.
Well, we shouldn't be a part of it, that's my opinion.
All right.
Because as soon as you give all the power and the money to Golf Australia, which Victoria has done, the first thing they tried to do was get rid of women's pennant. Now, women's pennant in Victoria, metropolitan pennant particularly, is much bigger in the eyes of female members of golf clubs here than probably in most states.
I think that's true. Pennant or golf in Melbourne generally, I would say.
Yeah, it is. And they're saying, oh, well, you know, we want to encourage elite young players. Well, excuse me, 90% of the golfers, female, the average age is not young. They're the grassroots of the club. They're the backbone. They enjoy their Friday pennant and their Sunday pennant, and they call it different names. And anyway, Golf Australia tried to get that through, and all the clubs were invited to send submissions via their committees. And fortunately, they had to back down and say, oh, but yes, next year there will be form of pennant and blah, blah. The exact details I don't know. But this is, you know, how do you... And then on the other hand, they're turning around and saying, we want to encourage more women to play. Well, that's not the right way to go about it. You know, I get so cross.
Which is good, and that's what we want to hear. And in fact, it's as things should be. And you mentioned before, let's come to this first. You mentioned before that you're sort of a straight talker, and certainly that interview I listened to with you, I would imagine there's been times when that's been both helpful and a hindrance in your career.
Oh, absolutely. But I don't, you know, why say yes to something that no is the only answer to? You know, there were times we supposedly have to bite your tongue. Well, why? If you see something that's not right, like kneel down before you tee off in the Canadian Amateur Championships in Winnipeg, Ontario, so they can measure the length of your skirt.
Wow. What year was that?
Please.
What year was that, Jane?
80, I think. 80, 81.
That's certainly my generation. That's quite staggering, isn't it?
Oh, well, try when we were in England. We went to St Andrews, we went to Troon, all the, you know, superstar courses on the men's British Open roster. We're invited to play at the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Gentlemen.
Yes.
They invited us to play, but we had to change in the broom closet. We turned up at the gates of Turnberry and drove in to the clubhouse, and they turned us back around and sent us to the ladies' little turnkey house at the front of the gates. I hated all of that. I think it probably still goes on.
It's still such a vexed issue, Jane. Now, I don't want to be impolite, but I must ask how old you are, because however many years that you've been on the planet for, what I'd like to know is, why can't we figure this stuff out? Why is this men and women and these political issues, why do they continue to bubble away generations down the track? In my mind, there's two or three. The biggest one, there's still more men playing golf and more male members of clubs, so they dominate. I know of, I think it is Edwina's club in Sydney, the Australian, they can't vote for anything. Women.
And that's so backward, it doesn't matter.
I thought that was actually made illegal. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I thought that was actually now against the law to discriminate in that way.
Yeah, well, and also because of the imbalance of numbers, and it's always going to be thus, that's why women have women's committees, so that they can run their events and everyone's happy about it. Basically, women don't want to play with men and men don't want to play with women in that situation. The blokes want to go out on Saturday and play with their mates, and whatever other day of the week they have as a defined male day, and the women the same. And there's nothing wrong with that, because they do play in mixed events and they do play together on other days. But, you know, competition days, they've ruined that, I think, at our club and other clubs, whereby, they've had for some, probably 12 months now, maybe more, that you're playing in the same comp as the men, and the women's tees are about a foot in front of the men's tees. So the scores are going to be all in favour of the males. And I'm a big believer in this 80-20 theory where, the strength of women is much less than a man, and therefore you should have the tees set up in that ratio of 80% strength, so the yardages are more comparable, meaning if a hole is designed for a man to hit a wedge into a par 5, women should be in the same situation, the average woman. But generally speaking, you'll find most women are hitting fairway woods or rescues. So that's where it's all gone. In fact, I think the golf courses are far too hard now for women particularly because they're designed by men. I've done some consultation work with Mike over the years, with Tony Cashmore. I've done a few private ones and tried to set up the courses, but in the end, that's not a lot of courses. And Mike, you can quote me on this, Mike did say to me once when we were walking around one course down here in Melbourne as to where, should they put the women's tees, because he said, I just don't understand how women hit it or how far they don't hit it, which is a fair comment. So there should be more consultation with women, the average women, about how a golf course for them via the tee situation should be set up. But it's not happening.
Like everything, it's like a hairball, isn't it? You tug one hair on this side and you open up a whole bunch of issues on the other. Broadly speaking, is the notion that everybody on the golf course are actually just golfers, be they men, women, kids, senior citizens, whatever it is, and that done right, I think what you're talking about is course setup issues. Is more of the problem there. The broad concept to me seems much more sensible, where there's a golf competition and anybody can come and play in it. This is the notion of this world handicapping system, where each set of tees can be rated independently and people can play competition and the handicaps will sort themselves out, and that we'll all be able to play one big pool of competition. Generally speaking, do you think that's a good idea going wrong around the edges with course setup, or do you think that things should be separate still?
Unless they get the formula right, which they haven't, in my opinion, that doesn't work. It's been proven not to work. They call it a medley comp where everyone's in the same comp, but it's inequitable. The women, they pay their fees, the same fees for whatever rating membership they've got, and they should have the same opportunities. But with the way the courses are set up and the handicap system doesn't make an allowance for that. So they haven't got the system right. Now, if they get the system right, hey, that's fabulous, but it ain't happened yet.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the goal. You might be right. We might not be there yet, but the goal
I know it's
is
the goal,
to make it equitable.
It's nowhere near there.
Do we take golf too seriously sometimes, Jane? These
Yes.
and we can have hours and hours of conversations about the handicapping system and all. In fact, having worked at GolfLink, I've seen the 7 and 8 page emails that come in there from retired mathematicians who've come up with a better way to do the whole thing than what already exists. So we can spend hours talking about that and course setups.
It's circle work.
Yeah. And ultimately, actually doesn't matter, does it? You play by the handicap that's printed on the card. You do your very best. When it's over, you go and have a drink. That's kind of what it should be, shouldn't it? So,
well, that's why I like social golf. I mean, I'm a member at Kew, but I'm also an honorary member at Huntingdale and 13th Beach, and I'm a member at Anglesey. I can play any of those courses if I like, but not in competition. I'd rather play those courses socially with my friends rather than go into a competition. I've been there, done that, and that's where my attitude these days is very different. I've had to go back and, not had to, but I was requested, forcibly sort of thing, by my friends to play pennant a couple of times over the last couple of years because we'd lacked the numbers to fill the teams, because we're losing members, because the women are getting older, they go out of the golf club, they play bridge, and we're not replacing them with more women because women aren't still overall totally welcomed in golf clubs. There's still this a male dominance. I think they'd rather have us making hot cross buns on Good Friday. And I've had that said to me.
My goodness. Well, wow.
So it's still there. So that's why I just rather go social golf, forget competitions, nothing else to do, more fun.
Interesting. Do you play much these? As you said, your interest sort of waned, but sort of how much are you playing compared to maybe 10 years ago, perhaps?
Oh, hardly at all. I haven't played for a couple of years, maybe 1 or 2 games or 9 holes here and there. But that's because, as I said, I've been doing other things. For instance, at Anglesey, we have kangaroos on the golf course, and some members there thought of the idea of doing roo tours for visitors.
Thank God. For a moment I thought you were going to say you were shooting them.
No. They've been making thousands of dollars by taking
Is that right?
2 carts out in the morning and the afternoon in summer, all volunteers from the golf club, doing the driving and talking about the kangaroos, take them out to where the mobs are. Wow. And I've been doing that for 2 years or so.
That can't be right, Jane, because
fun.
This is golf and that's innovation. Those two things don't go together.
I reckon country courses get it better.
I do too. Well, they're forced to, aren't they? They don't have the funds, do they?
That's right.
So there's a famous old saying in golf, they didn't have enough money to bugger it up.
No. And also, when I was a kid, the interstate and national teams were majority made up of country kids because they were allowed on golf courses.
It was an access issue. That's right. It's an access issue, isn't it? Which I think is probably still the case to this day. I wonder whether the motivations for a lot of younger people getting involved in the game have changed. You can't help but look at the professional game, particularly the men's game, but also the women's game, which lags an awful long way behind, but those women who are at the top of the game are still doing very well financially. Thank you very much. Not in comparison, but they're making more than golf riders, I can tell you that. Which is as it should be. I wonder whether the motivations have changed for young people coming to them. Did you see anything along those lines as your career developed? You told us that for you it was you just wanted to play, and then at some point, I imagine, if you've got the sort of talent you have, there's nothing left to do in amateur golf. There's no point not turning professional. I imagine that there comes a time, and you can tell us whether that was the case for you or not. But do you see a change in the reasons that young people perhaps start to pursue golf?
You're right about there comes a time when you've won everything and there's no more challenges available. So, and you wanted another challenge, or you went and did something else. That's what happened. But these days, look, if I was 14 or 15 now, I certainly wouldn't have chosen golf. I'd be playing soccer. I'd be playing cricket, football, because they weren't available for us. In those days. So with the kids these days, I think the choices of sports are much greater for them. And I don't know, I don't think as many take on the role of professional golf because you've got to leave this country, and that's a big ask. There's no real circuit. I mean, they used to have a summer circuit of pro-ams around the eastern seaboard, which was very popular. But the men have, they can do lots of tournaments like the Troppo circuit up in Queensland, but there isn't that much available for the women. So they've got one choice only, and that's to go professional and play either in Asia, Europe or America.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, getting onto those tours, I chose America. I'd rather have chosen Japan, but in those days, and I don't know if it's the case now, the qualification rules were so stringent it was almost impossible to get on. So those players that did go on to the Japanese tour, I take my hat off to them.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, Karis Davidson, who plays in Japan, if I'm not mistaken, she's still under I think it was a 1 or a 2 year requirement that everywhere she travelled she had to take a translator paid for at her expense because she didn't speak the language. And I think that's quite common for international players. It's a very closed shop. It might be, aside from the men's senior tour, which they like to call the Champions Tour now, or the PGA Tour Champions to be correct, so we deliberately don't call it that, that might be the most closed golf circuit in the world. Paul Lawrie won the Open in 99, can't get a start on the Champions Tour.
Really?
So there's the misnomer. Yeah, can't get a start on the Champions Tour. So there's a misnomer there. And I think probably the second most closed shop in terms of golf circuits is probably the Women's Japan Tour. Which is very much so. Because, of course, golf in Japan for women is much bigger, and the same in South Korea. It's a much bigger professional entity than the men's game.
Oh, look, even when we used to go over there at the end of the LPGA season in October or November, we go for 2 tournaments in Japan. Everything was paid for, which was great because it's so expensive. But they had the American president visiting Tokyo on one of the days we had to go out and play golf, and all the courses are in the country, so it was an hour or 2 drive on the bus, but we had to catch the train this day. Well, I was travelling with one of the Japanese superstars, and everyone on the train recognised her going and coming and in the streets. Extraordinary. And that was way back then in the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it's twice as many, but there's certainly more women's events on their tour in Japan than the men's events on the men's Japanese tour.
Oh, is it?
And in Korea, most definitely, by far, the more popular of the 2 games is the women's game. We spoke to Dean Hurden, who's been caddying up there for a long time, has caddied for a lot of South Korean players, and he said the quality of the players coming out and the profile of the players within Korea, he said, quite a few of them choose not to go to America because they don't need to. And to be honest with you, Australians should understand that. Why would you go to America? And why would Americans come here if they can stay at home and make $5, $6, $7 million a year playing golf in their own backyard? It's just the most sensible thing to do.
Well, it's also the language barrier too.
Yeah, it is much easier, isn't it, to avoid. You mentioned and I did note, by the way, that you very neatly dodged the age question. So well done for that. You didn't completely get away with it, but I'm going to let you off the hook. If you don't want to tell us, that's fine.
Oh, no, I just had a birthday and I just turned 66. So.
Oh, congratulations and happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned the LPGA. You went and played the LPGA. I'm going to say you went probably around 1980? Ish?
81.
81. And I haven't mentioned, of course, 3 Australian women's amateurs you won before that and 3 Australian junior girls amateurs. One year you won both of them in the same. So you certainly had the credentials to think about turning professional and pursuing a professional career. So you did that. We'll come back to some of the amateur stuff later. What was America like? What was the LPGA like in sort of 1980? Were you happy? I mean, you said you'd preferred to go to Japan. Why would you have preferred Japan? How did you find America? Not everybody loves America when they...
Look, it was work. It wasn't there for pleasure. It wasn't a closed shop, but it was fairly closed. And when you're a newbie on the block on the LPGA, meaning women, you've got to sort of earn your position.
Was it bitchy?
Oh, yeah.
The men are bitchy.
What group of women are not bitchy?
Well, people are bitchy. I'll be completely honest with you.
Generally, yeah. But,
men are no
wasn't so
different.
much that they're sort of cliques.
Yeah.
There's the Bible group, and they're very polite in that, but being an Australian and you're playing with one of the girls who's fairly religious and you've just had a triple bogey or something, you say, bloody hell. Of course, now we're blaspheming the Lord, and this is in the middle of a tournament.
Golf.
So there's some strange things. Look, I knew a lot of those girls when they were amateurs, when we played amateur golf, world championships, and we were really good friends. But once you're on the LPGA, it's sort of like, oh, okay.
It's dog eat dog, isn't it? Who are we talking about? Who are the names we might recognise from that era? Who were the sort of the big stars of the game?
Well, the superstar that I didn't play with much except on the LPGA was Joanne Carner.
Mm-hmm. What a legend.
Beth Daniel, Amy Alcott. There's a whole stack of them. What's her name? Lopez.
Nancy?
She was, she retired from golf, but she was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Sort of the Sevi of the women's game there, wasn't she? Just charismatic,
she
dominant.
won everything.
Yeah, incredible. And a shy, humble, that rare thing, a genuinely shy and humble champion. Had an extraordinary gift, clearly.
Well, she was amazing. I remember being paired with her based on our scores for the third round in, I think it was Portland. And, I mean, she's really nice. She's one of the nicest. Nancy was one of the nicest people you could meet. But I hit a nice drive down the first, and she sort of almost hit a worm raper down the first, and I thought, oh, that's not good. But she was still 30 metres ahead of me. I've hit a nice shot into the first green, but I was a club short, so I'm at the front, the pin's at the back. She scunged it out to the right, pin high, and then chips in a nice 3-putt. And that was the entire day's story. But there's someone who knows how to make a score when she's just not having the best day. That's how good she was.
That's the story of golf, though, isn't it, Jane? That is really
sometimes.
golf, isn't it? I'm sure you've had those days too, probably in the company of somebody who looked up to you and thought, she can't be that much better than me. I'm a good player. And then you've done that to them and they thought the same thing you did about Nancy. You've got some special magical gift that you've been given. It's not fair. It's not a fair fight, is it?
It's nice to be lucky. I mean, I never found golf hard. I wasn't a great practicer, as you would find many of my captains and managers over the years pulling their hair out, because I enjoyed like the competition, match play. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were at Royal Sydney playing, it was the Australia-Japan series or something like that, and we'd have a hit, and on the practice fairway I was shocking. The balls were going every which way. And my captain, who was Joan Fisher at the stage, told me later that she considered not even playing me that day because I was so bad on the practice fairway. But I played really well on the course, so, and we're all different.
Indeed. And, of course, this is a real trap for young players, the practice conundrum, isn't it? Because if you go to a professional tournament, you will find somebody on the range at 7 a.m. and guaranteed that same person will be on the range at 5 p.m. having played in between. And if you're a young professional, particularly if that person is successful, the easy thing to think, isn't it? Well, it works for them. That's what I have to do.
Yeah, well, you've got a person like Vijay Singh who spent his life on the practice fairway, morning, noon and night. But it doesn't suit everybody. I mean, there are probably tons of examples of great professionals over the years who hardly ever practice. They just, have a hit and get out there and do their stuff. Yeah.
Laura Davies is one who springs to mind.
Yep. She's not interested in that stuff.
No.
She's interested in what she does, how she does it, how she goes about it, and I think that's the best way to be. But, in the modern world, things change. As soon as a new club or a new teacher comes out with a new concept, everyone's into it. It's all about money.
Yeah. Are there new concepts, Jane? Does Jane Locke's golf swing of the 70s still stand up today? Could Jane still be a player today and successful?
No. Look, when we won Edwina, Lindy and I, when we won the World Championship for the first time in 78, I think it was, that was great. They had a party at Victoria Golf Club. Then a few years later, I can't think of Vicky Thomas and the other two girls that then won the World Championship for Australia for the second time, were invited to that same cocktail party to celebrate their win. We had a photo taken, them with us, and it was like looking at giants, though big, strong, muscular, tall girls, and we're all tiny little things. So, it's a different world. They're all into it, in the fitness and the length. The length they hit it these days is ridiculous.
Would you have been like that? Would you have preferred to play in this modern era? You said you were a sporty girl as a kid.
Yeah, no, because that means work. Go to the gym.
First problem right there, having to do some sort of work. So how did you play the game? What were the strengths of your game? And I'm interested in the equipment you played at the time as well. I was staggered to find out that Jan Stevenson carried and used a 2-iron and, in fact, hit one of her most crucial shots with a 2-iron when she won the US Open in, I'm going to say, 83?
That would have been at Sacramento, I think, in California.
Yeah, 17th hole. Perhaps she hit a 2-iron to a par 5, I think she told me. But the point being, you could not find a 2-iron on the women's tour, I don't think. I think Angel Yin might carry one. And I don't reckon you'd have much luck finding a 2-iron on the men's tour in this day and age either.
No. Well, I because that's all there was, a 2-iron through, your sand wedge, not a choice of 16,000 wedges with 17 lofts and but I remember that Sacramento tournament, it was the most beautiful golf course, And the practice fairway was beautiful. So I thought after the first practice round, because, US Opens are long courses. They're massively long. And I wasn't a big hitter. So I had to spend a couple of hours that evening hitting my 2-iron so I could get, some sort of confidence in it. And, Murphy's Law, I didn't hit it once the next day. But my strength was my short game. I was accurate. My short game was good and my putting was good, and that was it.
Is that a better, more entertaining, more skillful game than the game we see today? We look at some of the power players even in women's golf today, and there's some staggering clubhead speeds. I watched Maria Fassi up close here in Australia earlier this year, and my goodness, she generates some amazing clubhead speed. She doesn't really yet have full control of it, I don't think. But when she does, my goodness, what a force she will be. Is one more entertaining than the other? Where there's no question we've moved to a power game, particularly in men's golf, and it seems to be a direction we're heading with women's golf as well. Is it a more entertaining game? Just different? What's your take on the modern?
My preference is the short game is more interesting, but that's me. It's a bit like when tennis went to hard court away from Kooyong, which was grass. It lost its entertainment value for me. The skill didn't seem the same because they didn't have to play a bigger variety of shots. And I think it's a bit the same here. I'd rather, when I go out to watch the Women's Open at 13th Beach or the Australian Women's Open, wherever it'll be, whenever, I'll go and watch them in the bunkers or the chipping green, I don't want to see them hit the ball 500 miles.
No. And do you still go and watch 13th Beach? Of course, you had a hand in the design. You mentioned that. We'll get you to flesh that out.
Just the women's tees, yeah.
Yeah, but so you still do go and watch some of the top players? You've still got an interest in?
Yeah, as long as it's not too crowded. I went to the Women's British Open a few years ago at Liverpool, and, of course, it's a really small course, so there's spectators everywhere, and you couldn't move. So I don't like watching golf that way. I like to see it with the space, and that's where 13th Beach really worked out.
Oh, it's a fantastic event, that Vic Open, isn't it? That ability to walk with the players. That would have been the norm, I'd imagine, when you played. Perhaps not so in America, but I would imagine here in Australia would have been the norm to have the crowds walk the fairways with you at tournaments here in Australia.
They did walk the fairways, but the crowds were so big, and I'm not exaggerating because we've got photos and video of it, that they had to go into the pro shop or the work sheds and get ropes so that they could keep them away from us,
where
far enough away.
Here in Australia you're talking about?
That was at Victoria Golf Club.
Right. And what year?
That was just for the Victorian Amateur Championship.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. Goodness me. Pine for that sort of crowd in this day and age, wouldn't we? That sort of see it. Because that Vic Open, one of the great potential tragedies of the Vic Open is that it'll become a victim of its own success. And when you get a certain level of player tee up, which they're not far from having, it becomes almost necessary to have the ropes back in place, doesn't it? Whereas
and that's when you'll lose the interest factor. That's right. Because it's the novelty factor is still there while that's still going on. Yeah. But having the space and the style and setup of those two golf courses, the trees are not there as an impediment. You get plenty of viewing areas. But once you stop them walking with the players, you've lost.
That's right. What's made it unique and built it to the point where it is. Yeah, we give the authorities in the game and the organisers a lot of kicking over the time, but there's an example where they've got it 100% right at the moment.
Absolutely.
I think it's been what a revelation. And internationally people are trying to copy it. And it would have been very easy for that not to happen because the first one, of course, was held in suburban Melbourne where they had the combined fields. And it would have been very easy after that event to say, oh, look, it was interesting, but it didn't really work, and go back to doing the norm. But they put their thinking caps on and they took it regional. And as we can see, within 8 years, it's now a European Tour and an LPGA event, which I don't think anybody would have envisaged in 2012 when it kicked off. I hope you're finding this discussion as compelling as I did, and I can recommend sticking around for the rest of it. But before we get back to Jane, this is the part of the show where I remind you that if you haven't already done so, you really should sign up as a subscriber. Now, it's free. The word subscription kind of muddies the waters a bit, but it is free. And what it means is you'll never miss an episode of the show because they'll be automatically delivered to your phone, your tablet, your laptop, whatever device you've decided to subscribe on. That happens as soon as the show is released. Now, the big players in this area are Apple Podcasts. They're found on every Apple device, iPad, iPhone, and on Apple computers. Spotify, which most people know for their music, and Google Podcasts, which are available on any device that you care to choose. The show's available on all of those. If you're a more advanced podcast listener and you prefer one of the other multitude of apps out there, I don't need to tell you how you can find us on those. I do need to tell you, however, how to find us for both feedback and to access the back catalogue. Getting in touch is easy. You can track me down directly on Twitter at Rod_Morri. That's M for Mary, O-R-R-I. My direct messages are open, so you can send me something without me needing to follow you. Alternatively, you can send an email either direct to me, rod@talkandgolf.com, just the one G in Talk and Golf, or you can send one direct to the magazine golf@golfaustralia.com.au. Now, if you're new here and you want to have a flick through the archive of past episodes, the easiest way is to become a subscriber, as I described above. But if you don't want to do that, simply head to the magazine website at golfaustralia.com.au. Scan along the top, you'll see the podcast tab. Click on that and you'll find all of the back catalogue available on that page. There's some good stuff in there. And if you're enjoying this, then I'm pretty certain you'll enjoy much of what you'll find there also. That's enough of the admin. Let's get back to Jane Locke. Do you still stay in touch with many of the players? I know that you did a lot of years of teaching at Bulleen. Mm-hmm. Do you still do any teaching at Bulleen?
Nope. I'm retired.
So you do none at all. Right, fantastic.
Nope. It's great.
You said those years ago your preference was to work with sort of beginners,
yes,
sort of amateur players. Did you did you work with over the years? Because by accident you can't help it. At some point a beginner's going to walk in, aren't they, Jane, who is good? Yeah. And you won't be able to avoid it whether you want to or not. They're going to go on to become a very good player, and you're going to be their coach. Did that happen for you?
Well, I've had a lot of those over the years, but it's interesting. The politics, they've been made members of private golf clubs through family, mm-hmm. and the local professional of that club has initially taught them, but they've come to me and they said, look, they've been promising and they've done well and they've won things, and they've rung and said, look, I want to thank you for your help, but I just didn't want to, embarrass my club pro. And there's a lot of that. And I said, look, I don't live off that anymore. What you do is fine, and I'm glad to have been part of it. So you do things sort of by subversion in a way. Yeah. But the real fun is the real beginners who don't become anybody. They just go out and play, not very well, and never will.
And they're the real golfers in truth, aren't they? Globally.
Yeah.
They're the bulk of people by far.
Well, it's like I had one woman many years ago. She could barely hit it 10 or 15 feet, and it was always along the ground. And one day she got one ball to go up in the air, and this is after I don't know how many lessons, and she was so excited, just absolutely over the moon. And that's what you teach for. Mm-hmm. And you just think pleasure they get.
Because of course Tiger can only get that joy from winning another Masters, can't he? It's the truth, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a different level of expectation. Yes.
And it's a different it's a different reward system of what is good, isn't it? When you first start, it's absolutely true. Just getting the ball in the air is an enormous victory.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
It's like when you're at school. I always said this to my beginners. I said, look, when you're in first form and you've got an exam, it's just as important as an exam as the ones in your last year of school. They're all important. Mm-hmm. So the level, saying to people, oh, that's nothing, it's only first form, it's not much. Well, it was. It was huge. And it's the same in golf.
Sets a pattern, doesn't it? For success or otherwise for the rest of what's to follow with that pursuit. I want to talk about some of the highlights of the game for you, Jane, and I would imagine that winning the Australian Women's Amateur 3 times would be a highlight. I'll be surprised if you told me otherwise. So I wouldn't mind getting just some quick thoughts from you about those. I feel like winning the Australian Girls Junior Amateur Champion 3 times would have been a real highlight as well, and I know that you did both in the same year, one of those years. It feels like amateur golf or amateur victories were much bigger and more important in the 70s than they perhaps are today. Would you go along with that?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
So, my first tournament was the Victorian Junior Championships, and believe it or not, the first one I played was at Royal Melbourne West. Mm-hmm. So I was spoilt.
Well, yeah.
And in those days, the bunkers, fairway bunkers, you had a choice of what you could play out of them. It's not, it's only a wedge. They weren't all,
deep
bomb craters.
Mm-hmm.
And I won that, and I won 5 in a row.
How old were you?
I was too old.
How old was the first one when you won the first one?
15, I think.
So you took up the game at 14, you won the Victorian Junior at 15.
I think.
That's sickening, Jane. There are those of us who spend our whole lives and never get better than double digits, and you've spent 12 months at it and you've beat every other good golfer in the state.
Well, just lucky. You either, you're born with it or you're not, I suppose.
I think you're right.
Some people work their tails off and achieve success. And I suppose I did in my way, but not the practice fairway way.
72 holes in a day.
I wish I could still do it, but
that'd be wonderful.
There's no room on the golf courses.
No, that's exactly. Well, pre-COVID, there was probably a few courses where it might have been possible, but certainly COVID has done golf an enormous favour in the sense of participation. You can't get a tee time for love nor money in Sydney. On a public golf course.
I can believe that. It's a bit the same here in Melbourne. They had a bit of a push from some of the private clubs against Mr. Andrews, who's an avid golfer.
He is, that's right.
To open up the golf courses. And I agree with it because it's an outdoor activity. You're not going to be your ball's always going to go this way. Someone else's ball's going to go that way. You're not going to be down the middle on top of each other. I've never seen the logic behind that. They can't use the clubhouse, and that's fine.
Yes, contentious is, I think, how we would describe that. So back to, I started you on this road and then I interrupted you and took you elsewhere. How did you like America?
Look, I met a lot of good people. We used to stay in private housing, which is billeting here, and you do meet a lot of good people. And most of them are retired and rich and live on or near the golf course, so that was handy. But I like playing the tournaments. I got used to my own company, so I didn't mind sitting in airports trying to figure out who all the other people were in the waiting area, what they did for a living, and reading, and hotels drove me nuts. I think I still would have preferred to go to Japan because I like languages. Not that I could learn Japanese very well, but I could vaguely get by.
I reckon you could have if you'd set your mind to it. If you're a reader especially, I think that's the kind of mind that will turn itself to, and a very difficult second language to learn, an Asian language, completely foreign sounds and tongue movements.
There's so many different levels of Japanese.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, a French friend of mine, was studying Japanese from first year in high school. And when she went over there to work, she was about the fourth from the bottom in terms of who she could speak to in Japanese, in terms of authority, businessmen, corporations, etc.
Right.
And she was fluent.
Would that have interested you, a whole different culture?
Yeah.
I
mean, with this lockdown, we had a trip planned to go to the States, funny enough, because we'd been to a few other places and there were a few things that, you could see over there. There's a lot of good places to see, but I wouldn't be going back there now, and not for the next several years, so I'd rather go back to Asia again.
Yeah. Because it's always true, of course, what people don't realise about professional golf is that it's a lot of airports and hotels, isn't it? It's not like travelling the way people who work 9 to 5 for a living and they have their 2 or 4 weeks holiday and they get on a plane and they go somewhere and they have that's not that kind of travel, is it? It's a completely different thing.
I mean, the system is basically, if you're the average player on the tour, which I was, you you arrive from one tournament, or you fly out on a Sunday afternoon with a corporation like Linoleum Corporation. Their jet would take you to a golf course to play a Pro-Am on the Monday, for which you're paid. Then they'd fly you to where the next tournament site was. That's Tuesday morning. You have got your first practice round, but you've got to wash clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Pro-Am on Wednesday, and you have to go to the Pro-Am dinner because of the sponsors. Yep. Then there's Thursday, Friday. If you make the cut, you've got to play Saturday, Sunday, and the whole cycle goes on again. Now, if you don't make the cut, you've got to, be able to cover your expenses for the next week, because the prize money wasn't that big, but it's all relative to the times.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not earning money. If you don't make the cut, you don't make money.
It's the wrong way to describe it, but in many ways you're like a performing monkey, aren't you?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's why there's a friend of mine who recently passed away said, Ian Stanley, he just announced to everybody at this big function, the Hall of Fame dinner, I don't know, I wanted to present this to you, Jane. You become a hermit. Basically, I like my own company. I've got my own group of friends, and I don't like cocktail parties and social gatherings, because that's what we have to do all the time, amateur and pro. So that's why I balk at going to all these things, and much more pleasurable.
It's the entertainer's dilemma, isn't it, really, is that you rely 100% on the entertainment you can provide to keep the lifestyle alive, and at some point that balance can get out of whack. Is there an element of John Huggett? I don't know whether you know John. John's a good friend of Clates's and probably one of the best golf riders in the world. We've had him on the show as well. He's a terrific fella, John. But he's sort of got a saying, love the game, hate the people. And
John who?
John Huggan. He's a Scottish golf rider.
No, I don't know him.
As he says, hate is too strong a word, but is that a sentiment that makes sense to you? Love the game, hate the show that goes with it?
Yeah, that would pretty much be putting it the way I would. I think that's a very eloquent way of putting it.
Because the game itself never stops being, if you've got the sickness, and I suspect you have, the game itself never stops being, it's always true to you, isn't it? It never lets you down.
No.
It's all the stuff around golf that lets you down, isn't it?
Yeah, the simplicity has gone out of golf. There's too many rules. You've got to wear this, you've got to do that. You can't play here, you can't play there. Hurry up, you've got a stopwatch on you. These things have only come in the last 20 years, and that's just the sheer numbers. But see, in Victoria, I think we're lucky that we've got a lot of pay-for-play courses.
Mm-hmm.
So the time poor can get out there and don't have to pay thousands of dollars in membership fees each year, or the joining fee for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's the way to go. I mean, I can, get in the car on a normal time, drive down the Bellarine Peninsula or the Mornington Peninsula and just play 6-7 different golf courses, and there's still more to play, and they're all good. And it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg.
No, golf's extremely affordable in this country. You would have seen in America. Tell some of the Australian listeners what golf costs in America, Jane.
Well,
not all
fortunately
golf.
I didn't have to pay,
No,
but I've heard a few stories when I was there. So with inflation it'll be more. But you're looking at like Pebble Beach, places like that, it's over $1,000.
Because you have to stay on site. The cheapest room is $500. The green fee's $500. You haven't eaten yet.
No,
they'll
ask you're not going to eat with those prices.
No, that's right. They'll ask you to take a caddy, who'll then have to be tipped.
Have to have a cart.
Or a cart. That's exactly right. So there's all these sort of trimmings around the game, isn't there, that don't really improve the game, but the business of golf gets in the way of golf in so many ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's all about money.
So there's
the whole thing.
And here's two of us who've made the bulk of our livelihood out of the golf in some form, complaining about the business of golf. I can see the irony in it. Don't send me emails about that, people. I can see the irony, but it is also the truth. Has the game from time to time, or is all of that nonsense we've talked about there, has it disappointed you, Jane? I feel as though there's something there where there's, I don't know, do you feel like you underachieved perhaps with your game, or are there Are you like me? Are you not comfortable at the fancy clubs? Do you always feel? I've always felt like there's a class structure almost in golf.
Oh, yeah, there is, but I ignore that. I mean, I lived through it where you supposedly hobnob with all these superstars of business and other sports, and it meant nothing to me because I wasn't really interested. But there's a lot of that goes on, and I just think, look, it's a game. Go out and play with your friends, enjoy the views. You know, you go along the coast and play some of those courses. It's fantastic. But I don't like politics of clubs. I've stayed right out of it to the best I could. There's always something.
Yeah. Well, people would try to drag you in, wouldn't they, Jane? You're Jane Locke. You must know better. You're Jane Locke. You've played on the LPGA. You must come and you must know what we should do here as a club or as a committee. We expect you to know more about the game than everybody.
It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
That's what they don't tap into. And I wouldn't be the first professional golfer, male or female, to say that. They don't tap into the people at golf clubs that have got the expertise. They just get on the board because they're head of their own business, an accountant or a builder, whatever. And they think they know what to do with the golf courses. And they never ask the people. They give you a token question here and there, but they just, I always found that committees, once you get on a committee, suddenly the personality changes. It's almost like a uniform.
I wonder if golf is different for players like you, Jane, and those who've got a real ability for it than for those like me who are terrible at it but play it for most of their lives regardless. We must have a different attitude, mustn't we? If you were awful at golf, would you play?
Well, that's the other consideration. For now, I don't play and I don't expect to play. Well, I do, but as well as I used to. There's no way. Age comes into it, lack of play, lack of preparation, lack of commitment. So I would not be interested in playing rubbish. I think it was Dave, he's the Scottish golfer, he said he quit golf because he was rubbish at it. He got sick of playing badly. I can't think of his name. He's Scottish anyway. And that's my attitude. I'd rather give it up and play rubbish. But everyone's level of rubbish is different. That's
true, of course, yeah.
And, some of my friends said, but I'd love to play your rubbish. And I said, well, you can have it, but I don't want to.
That's right. The 10 marker looks great to the 20 marker, don't it? If I could just play like that 10 marker, I'd be happy. And the 10 marker looks at the 5 marker and thinks, good Lord, why do I bother?
Well, I use the analogy for a lot of my clients. I always encourage them to go to the women's tournaments. And this is the men I'm talking to. Go and watch the women professionals when they're down here, and you'll be able to relate to them better than you'll be able to relate to the men because they're so way out of their stratosphere. And the other thing too is you go to the men's tournament or the women's, the same thing, go to the practice fairway and the caddies aren't wearing their names of their players yet, their bibs, and they're all hitting these super shots and they all look like Tiger Woods in terms of what they're playing. You get them on the first tee and there's the difference. Suddenly there's the superstars and then there's the also-rans. But on the practice fairway, they all look the same.
And all hit it. What's that about, Jane?
That's between the ears.
Yeah. Is that ultimately the key to golf, top-level golf?
Yeah. Nerves. That's when people, you get to an age, nerves must play a part because, young kids have got no nerves. But the older you get, the more you think about it, the more you know what can go wrong. But when you're playing on tour, the courage of your convictions and the belief in yourself has to be as good as the shots you can play on the course. The practice fairway, sorry. So if you can't translate it from the practice fairway to the golf course on a high level, on a regular basis, then it has to be between the ears.
Big shots at big moments are really only ever played by the very best, aren't they? They're the shots we remember, the Hogan 1-iron into 18 at Merion and some of the shots that Tigers hit over the years, the highlight reel of just specific shots at specific moments that most players would have balked at the challenge perhaps. Even his peers would perhaps balk at the challenge, not necessarily because they don't have the talent to hit the shot, just because the potential for disaster if it goes wrong sort of takes over. How would you rate your own career, Jane? Because particularly given your amateur career, and we know that here in Australia we have limited, you don't know how good you are until you get with the very best. That's one of the reasons most people want to go on. If you've got any talent, you want to play in America and all those sorts of things, because you want to see how you stand up against the best. There's no way to know unless you actually go out there and mix it with them. How would you rate your career? It looks on paper like perhaps an underachiever.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think I achieved everything I wanted as an amateur and possibly more. As a professional, I had a couple of good years, but I was never, I got into the top 20, top 15, but I was never in the category of a true star. I was a player and I made a good living, but I was never a superstar.
Did you want it?
Oh, well, if you're over there doing it, you may as well.
No, but did you want it? It's one thing to say, well, if you're over there, you may as well. But did you want it? Was it your life's goal? I'm guessing that when you were an amateur, that winning the Australian Women's Amateur was all you had in mind at some point in life. It drove everything. Did that same thing happen to you as a professional, or did the game lose something when you turned professional for you personally?
Well, I turned professional late, like I think I was 24 or something, and that is late. And maybe the best had gone, I don't know. The very best, I don't know. It would have been nice to be able to be there in the top 10, but that didn't happen. I got, I think, low teens and I was pretty happy about that. But the dynamics change every season. And to be honest, the one big factor is the length. Most of those players were very, very big hitters. I'm not a big hitter, never was. And I used to, when we had practice rounds at courses, there was another, I can't think of her name, girl there that always looked out for me and I looked out for her to have practice rounds with, because we both were short hitters. We just couldn't bear the, practicing with these players that were bombing it past us all the time. You get that enough during the actual tournaments. I mean, some courses, I remember one where you had to tee off over, it was a huge carry of water. I mean, I'm not short, but I'm not long. And I just kept plonking it into the water because I couldn't get over it. And I talked to the officials about it during the round, and they agreed that if they could, they would put a tee, because I wasn't the only one going in the water, but there was nowhere to put the tee. So, that gets to you. You get a bit sick of that.
That's an awful place to be as a professional too, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Did you try to get longer? We know that's a mistake that a lot of professionals have fallen for, particularly in the more modern era, chasing distance and losing everything else that makes them what they are.
Well, the funny thing is, and it goes back to equipment, I hit the ball longer now than I did then.
Wow.
And it's nothing to do with me getting stronger, I assure you.
Yeah.
It's the equipment. It's the balls, the shafts,
Giant heads on the drivers in particular.
Yeah.
That's been a huge change, obviously, in professional golf. It almost always comes up on this show at some point, as I think it does if you have a golf discussion. What did you notice about – what clubs did you play when you were sort of at your peak? Did you have any sort of a club contract or –
Well, there's two things. I had I don't think it was a contract. Oh, it might have been with Spalding, Australia. I used their clubs for many years, and they're all steel shafted, laminated clubs. And then in Japan, Hirohonma, he rang me, or had his secretary ring me and asking me would I like a set of his clubs. Well, they were the latest, greatest. So I went into his shop come factory in Tokyo, and it's just outside of Tokyo, the factory, and he made up a set of my first set of graphite shafted clubs, and they were just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And, he had them initialed for me. But they made such a difference because I could create more club head speed because they were nice and whippy. And that's where the distance came from, a bit more distance.
Yeah. And technology's all. Of course, it is relative, the distance, isn't it, Jane? So if you're getting longer, well, those girls who were bombing it past you before, they're getting longer too, aren't they? So do we achieve anything, or are we just on a treadmill here of the same kind of...
I think, look, it's on a personal level, you just feel better about hitting it longer and not worry about what they're doing. Right. You just think, oh, that's better. And I can remember playing with, just socially at a sort of a function for Berta Cheney for all the years of golf at Barwon Heads, and all the junior promotion girls, which is what we were. We all went to this and we all played golf before the dinner. And Sandra McCall, Louise Bryce, myself, and somebody else, we all teed off the first hole and we were playing. And as we're all, after about 7 or 8 holes, Sandy, who was a very big hitter, much longer than me, I was out driving her all the time because I had modern clubs and she didn't.
Right.
So she decided to get some new clubs.
I was going to say, I bet she had modern clubs by that afternoon.
Probably, yeah. She did have something, I think a driver or a couple of fairway woods that were new, but I think she still had the plastic covers on the top.
Oh, goodness.
We did things much more laid back in those days.
Is it the right focus for the game? I keep coming back to it. I'm not sure people understand what I'm trying to say here, but we have enough bashing sports in the world, I think, where the whole point of it is to get as big and strong as you possibly can and bash whatever it is further or higher or harder than you used to. I'm not sure that does golf need to become that? It feels like that's what it's becoming. Do you sense that?
Well, that's the way it's going, yeah, sure. I like watching golf on TV, but haven't been doing much of it this year. But I prefer to watch the golf that they play here in this country because, for instance, you get your Royal Melbourne greens and you get the run on the fairways and the bunkers, whereas American golf is you hit it up in the air and it stops on the green because they're all so well watered and they don't get scungy lies except when they're deep in the rough. Everything's manicured. I personally love to see a golf course, a good golf course, not a golf course because it can't, but with no bunkers.
No bunkers? No
bunkers.
Interesting.
Because I reckon you get a lot of people that enjoy that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, of course, the irony of bunkers, in fact, the irony of the modern game is that all of the things that make the game too difficult for so many of us don't bother the better player almost at all. Bunkers.
The thing about the bunkers, though, for women, the top women, I'm not talking professional, I'm talking the top sort of single-figure markers that I've come across over the years, the worst part of their game is bunker play.
And why do you think that is?
A couple of reasons. The bunkers are now getting deeper and deeper. It requires strength rather than just skill. And the technique, I mean, you can see the men, they just do this, tiny little backswing and they've got the power to finesse it through and get the backspin, Most women can't do that.
Trying to think of sort of great...
They look, a single figure marker in a bunker sometimes looks like a 20 or 30 marker.
Yeah. And, of course, the 20 or 30 markers enjoy that quite a bit because it's not often you get to see the single figure marker look quite so...
Look like a wally in a bunker.
That's right, yep. So sort of out of their depth. Did you watch the President's Cup at Royal Melbourne last year at all?
I think... Where was I? I was away. I'm sure I was overseas.
Well, wherever you were, it was an inferior place to be because Tiger Woods put on a masterclass at Royal Melbourne.
Oh, I did see, the last 2 days.
Magnificent. Speaking as you are, Jane, had you been there and seen that, as all of us who were, can leave this planet happy that we've seen something truly special, a truly special golf course and a truly special golfer.
Oh, he's amazing. I went to the President's Cup in the previous one they had and vowed and declared never to go again because we sat. There's so many people.
I was going to say, if you didn't like crowds, you probably picked the wrong event to go to. Yes.
But also it took took them nearly an hour to play the 10th hole, which is a reachable par 4 from your tee. Yeah. No, thanks.
Didn't Dustin Johnson hit it over the back, though? And when he picked up having conceded the hole, he'd already hit it 7 times? That's one of the great joys of the game, isn't it? He could whap it up there with a 2-iron, and yet, look at that. He's 7 shots later, he's telling the other bloke, no, come on, we'll go to the next tee. We've made a bit of a...
You've got to be creative on our courses, more so than I think on most of the tour courses in America.
There's more ground game, isn't there, which really does test... And I think Ernie Els put it so beautifully. Your target is not always the hole.
That's right.
You need to hit it there to get it to go there. And that demands both imagination and execution.
Yep.
Because when you hit away from the hole to try to get it close to the hole, if you don't execute properly, you can really make a fool of yourself.
Yeah.
You only got to hit it a bit thin, and if it doesn't catch that slope, it ends up 30 yards further away than where you started, and that's where you were aiming. And so that's one of the joys, isn't it, is that testing all of those elements of golf. Are we just old fuddy-duddies?
Oh, that's what some people would say, but, I mean, it's a bit like anything. The new normal will change again. It'll circle. Things will, how do I put it, the way they're building golf courses these days, they're too tough. Most of them are much tougher on the women. But there's a course on the border in Victoria and New South Wales, and I can't think of which one it is, that recently, in the last year or so, they met with the members and said, right, because they're an old membership, they filled in I don't know how many bunkers, and they made the course much more playable. And I think that's what's going to happen. It happened at Huntingdale, my club, when they redesigned it years ago. There were bunkers on certain holes that were ridiculous, gone. Same at Kingston Heath, gone. I mean, when you put bunkers in the middle of fairways, it's ridiculous.
Are we going to disagree now, Jane?
Probably.
I think we might. Should we do that, or should we just move on?
Oh, okay. I don't care.
Isn't the point of a bunker in the middle of the fairway to make the golfer think? I mean, you said you're a reader. Have you read much in the way of sort of golf architecture over the years, those who've written about course design and its sort of importance and its role?
I've read a fair bit, mainly the female course architects. Unfortunately, she died last year or the year before.
Who was that?
The American. Her husband's...
Oh, Alice Dye.
Alice.
Yeah,
yep.
Pete and Alice Dye.
To me, you're supposed to aim for the middle of the fairway because that's where it is. When they put bunkers in the middle of the fairways, they're not allowing you room on the right or the left. Or if they are, it's not very much. They're expecting you to lay up or carry. Well, women can't do that.
Or generally, done properly, bunkers in the middle of the fairways will generally have a narrower side and a wider side. Is it the 12th hole at Kingston Heath, the par 5, which has a centreline bunker?
Well, try the 11th for a start.
11th? Yeah, I don't pretend to be so familiar. I've only ever been to Kingston Heath when it's been used for 12.
No, that's right, but the 11th was the one that I'm referring to.
Par 5, is it?
Because the 12th is easier than... It's a par 4. Right. 10's a par 3, 11's a par 4, slight dogleg right, and they had bunkers on the right, an original one, but they had another one almost central. Now, if the only place you could play is up the left side, but they're straight into the tea tree. You only had about 5 or 10, 15 yards max. That's not golf for the average golfer. That's because they set the courses up for a certain amount of carry. Now, Mike would have told you how they do that, and you'd know anyway. 220 metres from the tee is the bunker or whatever, something like that. Well, that doesn't work for women. They can't hit. So they've got to lay out, and suddenly a par 4 becomes a par 5 because they can't get the value or the potential, the length of their drive, because there's a stupid bunker in the way.
Or even a par 6, depending on...
Sorry?
Or even a par 6, depending on what's happening up towards the green. It's not really golf. Carriers, this ability to now carry the ball huge distances in the air is probably the biggest fundamental change to the game.
Well, that's great for
It seems to me.
the average bloke,
If you can do it.
but the average woman is never going to do that. I mean, I'm probably out of date in terms of my stats here, but going back quite a few years, the average length a woman would hit her 5-iron was 100 yards.
Wow.
And look, a lot that would have changed and increased, but not much. No. So you make golf courses for women easier, and it won't affect the men because you can change the tee positions, and tees are cheap to make. It'll be a lot better. Duncan Andrews, who co-owner of 13th Beach and the Dunes and several others as well, when he set up the idea of the golf courses there with his partners, he said, I want to make the course friendly for women because if the women enjoy it, the men will come back. If the women don't enjoy it, the women won't let the men come back. They want to go somewhere else. And that's how his philosophy
Hence your involvement with helping to sell the course. Well, that's disgustingly pragmatic on his part. At some level, that's offensive.
It would be all about money from Duncan, for sure.
It's very pragmatic. There's no question about that. So what was your experience like then? So you laid out most of the, let's call them women's tees, did you, at 13th Beach, both courses, or?
Yeah. Tony Cashmore's the designer, and a brilliant designer at that, I might add, and he had his ideas of where the women's tees would be, and on a lot of them I tended to agree, but on quite a lot, probably half on both courses, the tees weren't in the right spots in terms of access to a par 3 green or the ability to avoid a bunker, having a chance to carry a bunker. So on one par 4, he wanted the tee back there. He said, I want it to be a test. And I said, well, there's no test if you're making a woman hit it into the scrub short of the bunkers. Put the tee up further on the high side on the left, and then you can ask the question, the woman, can I go over the bunker? Oh, I think I can. And it's such a thrill to see women being able to carry bunkers like the second on Royal Melbourne West. You can carry those bunkers on the right if the wind is suitable. So I put those tees where I best thought, the women would have a chance and a choice, not be beaten about the head every time they get up there and go, oh, it's too long, it's too far, it's too hard. And on the creek course, they had a creek running through it. It was a dry creek. But where the problem was, one of the tees, and I think I was responsible for this, put you in a position where you could only play it to one side, so you stayed short of the creek, which was on a diagonal aspect of the hole, so that you could then play it down the next. But invariably, downwind, you could get over it. But again, the average player still had to hit 3 woods in there.
Right.
And a par 5, the green's supposed to be receptive to a short club. Par 4's a medium, and par 3's a mix. That was a simple formula when I was growing up.
And just to back up a bit, what sort of reaction did you get? Did you get your way with where you wanted the women's tees placed at 13th Beach, and what sort of response did you get?
I got my way.
From women?
I don't think Tony was overly thrilled.
You're probably on the right track then. If there's a bloke disagreeing, there's a good chance you're on the right track.
Yeah. But I worked on the premise that I was trying to do it for the average female. And when they had the Vic Open there, the professional women they only used about 2 of our tees, and quite rightly, because they're bigger, stronger, longer.
Of course.
So those tees were for the average golfer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm very happy with the feedback that I've gotten.
Okay.
And from a lot of people who don't know that I actually had a hand in the tees, saying how much they really like 13th Beach courses because they're playable.
Well, that's encouraging.
See, Barwon Heads is the same.
Yeah.
Very playable. It's old-fashioned, and that's what you love about it.
Wonderful.
It doesn't bang you around the ears.
Indeed. What do we need to do to get more women interested in golf, apart from just be nice and welcoming? That'd be a pretty good start.
That'd be a start.
Yeah, as blokes, it'd pay to remember to occasionally be a little bit chivalrous and share. And
most blokes are okay. It's just there's a small number that think men are here to rule, and that's the end of the discussion. And
Will that
they're
change
usually the loudest.
generationally? Do you think that'll change, Jane? We'll come back to the question about what we need to do.
Hope
Do you think
so.
it has to, doesn't it? Just as an example, I know that the elite players in the modern era, both girls and boys, men and women, share the same facilities, camps, coaches, and so just there, that's a huge difference, isn't it? And an important one, because apart from anything, the boys learn some respect for the girls because they see A, how hard they work, and B, how good they actually are. I'm not sure that was the case 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, no, nothing like it. You never interacted with the men except at the Vic Open when we played in the same field as the men, but not with them.
That didn't go down well either, did it?
No, well, Ted Ball didn't really like the idea of being paired with me, so he didn't.
And why was
but
that?
they deliberately paired him with me.
Were you nasty to him, or did they?
No, he was I don't think he liked women playing golf. And his partner, Caddy, they weren't very nice.
Did they pair you with him because they felt you could stand up for yourself?
No, it was publicity.
Or for publicity, because he'd said prior to the tournament, I think, that he didn't think it was right, and therefore they had to find somebody who wasn't a shrinking violet.
Yeah.
And who do you go to when you don't want a shrinking violet? Well, Locke. She's your girl for that.
I think they did. I did get a few phone calls asking, and I said, I don't care.
Did you relish that in a way?
Not really, because it wasn't very pleasant. As opposed to the same tournament, one of the rounds was I played with Billy Dunk at Huntingdale in that same tournament, and he was just lovely.
You couldn't find a nicer guy, could you?
Absolutely lovely. And, that was the day I think I shot a course record that wasn't recognised, but that's another story. And he was just so encouraging and nice, and I thought, well, there's a difference to yesterday's pairing or whatever. Yeah.
Did you feel like you were because I think there was I'm making air quotes here, there was a rivalry or some animosity with Jan Stevenson, which I think you said wasn't really correct.
That was blown out.
Blown out of proportion.
We're a different generation almost.
Uh-huh.
Almost. I hardly knew her, but I don't think Jan liked the fact that when she was in Australia that she didn't get all the attention and all the publicity, and particularly when we had the Jan versus Jane, in inverted commas, at Metro, she hated that because they were all on my side. Well, boo-hoo, I'm from Melbourne. Get over it. It was so she is a controversial person in her own, but, as a superstar of the game, why would she let that bother her?
And do you think
she got paid well enough?
Genuinely let it bother her?
Oh, I think so. I beat her by I don't know how many shots.
Oh, that's awful. That's not much fun, is it? And
it's for me.
Well, it's for you. Did you have a better I mean, she's been somewhat contentious, Jan. I feel that, in fairness, quite rightly, she feels she hasn't had the recognition in Australia that she probably deserves. Not probably, that she does deserve, and I think that's true.
I don't disagree. I think it was the times. Yeah. See, Kari Webb coming at a much later date with all the modern technology, TV, audiences, all the stuff. Jan was over there and very well known over there and lauded over there and treated like a queen, which is quite right. She was a superstar.
Yeah.
But she didn't get to play here. There was nothing here to play in. Yeah. So what the people knew about her here wasn't what she was used to over there. You've got to remember, before her was Margie Masters, who went as a professional, and she was from Melbourne, from Woodlands Golf Club. And, no one ever knew her.
No. And I guess if you're Jan Stevenson and you're a superstar in America, you would imagine that what's happening back home in Australia is that thousands of young girls are taking up golf in droves because they want to be like you. And when you come home, all you're asked about is this upstart kid from Melbourne, this Locke woman, who's supposed to be the next big thing. You could understand how that might rank a little.
Oh, yeah, because I was nobody compared to her on the world stage.
Yeah.
Big fish in a little pond.
Yeah.
But she was in my hometown.
Yeah.
and I won most of my tournaments in Australia as an amateur and Melbourne. And as I said, the publicity in those days was, you'd have to see how much publicity there was. You wouldn't believe it. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I had other sports associations, netball, coming to me asking me what they should do differently. Well, now the boot's on the other foot, isn't it?
Well and truly.
Netball's just boom.
Yeah, well and truly. Yes, indeed. Indeed.
So I think Jan's ego was a bit too big at that stage. She would have been smarter to keep her mouth shut, and people would have barracked for her, madly.
Yeah. And did you ever repair that relationship or develop a relationship with her after that, even when you went to
I never really saw her much. No. And that's the other thing when you're on tour. Your tee times are staggered in accordance with your ranking.
Uh-huh.
And I hardly ever saw Jan at all. In fact, I saw more of her that week at Metro than I think I saw the rest of my career.
There you go. Clearly you took some satisfaction from the end of all of that, as you should have too, by the sound of it.
I couldn't see any point in feeling sorry for her. She's making a ton of money.
No,
she's very successful.
Yeah.
Don't begrudge the hometown their chance to barrack for someone from the hometown.
That's right. And the great champions, the Bobby Locks and actually that's a bad example, probably not Bobby Lock, but
no.
you hear famous stories of the really great pros who would always say you don't ever beat the club pro. Well, you never beat them too badly. You mentioned the magic word in Australian women's golf, Kari, and I mentioned that we'd had her on this very program. She had her ups and downs with the press, particularly in the early years, and I think she had a certain personality which wasn't necessarily suited to being a superstar early on. Unlike Jan, of course, Kari is a god to a whole generation of aspiring young Australian women. And I wonder whether that's just because of those reasons that we spoke about just then, with just the exposure.
She's a totally different personality to Jan. She's quiet, humble, and that was taken as being, what's the word, grumpy or whatever.
Arrogant, superior.
And she wasn't.
Yeah, no, she's not. Definitely not.
She's normal. She lost her temper a few times. Well, who hasn't?
Yeah. You encountered her when she was quite young.
I did. We had Mercedes Match Play Championship at Kingston Heath.
What year are we talking?
And I'd come back from the States. I'd basically retired. I wasn't involved in golf, and I was teaching, so we're talking early 90s. She was still an amateur, so you could figure it out from that, I think. And I had to play her in a match, and I've always said to her, because she was the budding superstar then, and I've said to her over the years that I was the last person to beat Kari Webb in match play. And I said I'm very chuffed about that because I did beat her that day, but she was having a bad day and I wasn't.
And could you see something in her even though she was having a bad day?
Yeah, because she was trying too hard. She didn't have to. She could have walloped me, but she was trying too hard because she wanted it so badly that she wasn't prepared to wait. She was in a hurry.
Which no doubt held her in good stead at various times further on and probably held her back at times as well. Yeah.
No, she's best player this country's ever seen, I think, bar none.
Yeah, extraordinary talent. Did she know who you were?
Yeah, I think so.
She's one who seems to have a grasp on the history of the game. She's always talking extremely fondly and with great pride about the founders of the LPGA. She's genuinely invested in something bigger than her own game, isn't she?
Well, it's the way she looks after, the Australian amateurs that she's had over there on tour, in tournaments, She's done the right thing.
Yeah.
She didn't have to either. That's not part of the deal.
No. She's big enough to do whatever she wants.
Yep.
And nobody could ever criticise her for it. But she genuinely sees something. In fact, I asked her straight up and she said that this was definitely the case. She actually feels like now is the start of the most important period of her career. Because her influence won't be just on her.
No.
It's about this whole generation of up-and-coming players, not just Australian players, but women more generally. She, like you, probably would have been a cricketer had that been an option.
Yeah, I would have. As I said, those opportunities did not exist. You could, I loved baseball. That was a dream. I just loved playing baseball. But there was nothing. Nothing. Once you left school, that's it.
Yeah.
So these days the kids have got a hell of a lot more choice, and they're making it too, and that's part of the reason why we're losing or not gaining females. Yeah. And the way they're treated in clubs, the kids, they get ticked off for their dress and
Did you bump up against a lot of that? You were a member at Huntingdale. Your dad was a member at Huntingdale, so of course, as you said, you got into Huntingdale a little bit early. Or because you were and had success quite early, did that bring a certain level of cash that protected you from a lot of that?
I'm not sure. Even after I'd had a successful career, you still get the chauvinistic attitudes. It's still there. Being successful male compared to successful female are two different entities. But as I said, I ignored most of it.
What do we do about it, though, Jane? Should we do something about it? Is that just how the world is?
Well, unless you can change the mindset of the majority of club members, especially the blokes, unfortunately, I don't know what you can do about it. See, you can't generalise either. I sort of don't like that, but I can only speak for the clubs that I am involved with, and I can assure you that is the case. And if that's the case for just the ones that I'm involved, there must be other clubs in that situation.
And if that's the case for you with all that you've done in the game, how must it be for somebody who's an unknown entity or new to the game?
The new ones get scared off.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen women who've joined clubs and been treated so badly, on course particularly, you know, being hit up on, being yelled at, being told to hurry, abused, you know, in stupid ways, that they've just left and they go and play their golf at the public courses with their girlfriends.
Or even worse, go and play something else instead, like tennis or, you know.
Well, time's another factor too.
Yes.
You know, everyone's, was in this state, very time poor. And you haven't got time. The people just don't have time. They have children, they have jobs. Most women these days have either full-time or part-time jobs, as opposed to, 30, 40 years ago. They could be looked after and supported by their working husband, and then they'll play their golf. So
certainly, society.
I mean, there's a lot more issues involved as well.
And they're not just issues affecting women either, in fairness. They're affecting everybody, especially some of those ones you've pointed. Do you know there are blokes listening, Jane, who simply straight up do not believe what you're saying?
No, I know, but that's okay. I know a lot of young men with families, and they can't. They'd like to play golf, but they can't because they're working all the week. They've got 3 kids at home and a wife. And rightly, she would like to have his company and help with the kids on the weekend. And that's another bugbear. I'd like to see 9 holes. When we've had course reconstruction works over the years, the course was reduced to 12 holes. And you know what? That's a perfect size game.
Oh, you've that sound you hear, Jane, is a can of worms opening. And it's you that's opened it.
But they used to, wasn't it originally only 9 or 12 holes?
Prestwick was 12 holes, where they played the very first Open, was only 12 holes. This 18-hole thing is...
I don't know where that came from.
St Andrews was 22. They reduced it by 4 holes to make 18, and that just became sort of the standard. And, of course, the only thing you can divide 18 by is 2, and so you get 9. And that's where we kind of... And so, in fact, there's a fantastic website that you would love by a Iceland golf course architect called Edwin Roald, who's a fantastic bloke. And I've got to tell you, the golf in Iceland looks absolutely amazing. Really incredible landscapes, these volcanic sort of deposits just sticking up out of the ground out of nowhere. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. But he's dedicated his life to trying to answer this question. He's actually got a website called Why 18 Holes, and there's some really interesting stuff on there. And yes, in fact, I must get him. I might even get him on this show one day. He's a really interesting guy, and he's a golf course architect in Iceland. Wow, goodness me, yes.
Pia Nielsen.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I've started thinking about it's not my go. This sounds ridiculous. I'm actually not that interested in the playing of the game. For the most part, it's the least interesting aspect of golf to me. I'm much more interested in sort of the people and courses and the thing about golf. What is it that grabs people about this game. But Pia Nilsson is one that I would like to. Have you met Pia? Did you work with her?
Pia and I were very good friends. We played the mini tour together in the States before we tried for our cards. And when she'd go back to Sweden for a break, I'd take her car and drive around to the mini tournaments on the mini tour. And when we were qualifying in Florida, I think, it was in Texas, in Houston for the main tour, she would always be writing in a notebook, things that she wanted to do in golf. Now, she didn't get her card, but she went back to Sweden, and boy, did she make a difference.
Yes, I think anybody who's not familiar with the story worked with a certain Annika Sorenstam for quite some time and wrote that amazing book. Was it called Par 54? It's this notion that you could there's no reason why you can't birdie every hole.
Yeah, something like that. Was
the essential idea, which makes a whole lot of sense until you think about it, and then it makes no sense, obviously, at all. What do we do then about the game, Jane, and particularly about should golf be trying to attract more women? I think it should. I think you can make a case.
It should, but I don't think they're going about it the right way, which is what I said to you earlier.
Yeah. So what should we do?
Well, for instance, stop interfering with women having the women's committee, because the women have lots of different events during the year at all golf clubs. The men only have a few, and they're happy with that. But they're saying, we've got to make it equal, this equal opportunity. And there's a very fine line here. Equal opportunity, no, we'll have the championships all at the same time, and it'll always be on a weekend, because we don't want to discourage working women. We want them to be able to play. Our particular club, we only had, I think, 2 working women who would have been eligible to play in the championships, any of them, A, B or C grade. And the women used to have the championship over 2 weeks, qualifying Tuesday, Thursday, quarterfinals on the Friday, and then the following week they had the semi-finals and the final and a huge lunch afterwards, which is the highest attendance lunch they have all year, including the Christmas lunch. Women do go in for that sort of thing. They combined it, like a lot of clubs have done over the last few years, with the men's championship qualifying. They did a mixture to appease the majority and have qualifying on weekdays and weekends. Problem, difference in weather. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then they had the match play sections all on the same days. And it was as slow as it was boring. There was no atmosphere, no lunch. They had, a presentation out on the putting green with.
Under the old system that you outlined there, which was, clearly had some success, there was obviously some pages. Is anybody excluded from that? Is that the perfect system, I guess is what I'm asking. So we might have swapped one imperfect for another imperfect. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, look, I'm talking about each golf club is different. Mm-hmm. For instance, Q is more the average, inverted commas, housewife, golf club with a few younger ones, not many. Mm-hmm. Whereas Huntydale, the whole pennant team is made up of about 3-year-olds, and therefore they've got school, or the slightly older ones have got work. And so it has to be that way. I don't argue the toss there. Yeah. But when you've got a club like Q, and there are several other clubs in metropolitan Melbourne, the best working model at the moment is have what they've always had. Now, if you see a change in the demographic of age group and working women, I totally agree. But we found a lot of people didn't enter, and they probably wouldn't have entered this year if and when they're going to have it, because they don't want to play it. To me, from a female point of view, it was a disaster.
Yeah, did they take feedback about that? I wonder if you can ever get this stuff right without getting it wrong first. Sort of like what we discussed with
there are pros and cons.
Yeah.
I don't argue the toss there.
Yeah.
There are definitely pros and cons for both. But to go cut and dried rather than try it out and tinker. I don't think enough thought went into it. The feedback, when they ask for feedback, it's like questionnaires that are very well worded so that you can't really put the answer that you want to put. Mm. You know, like, did you think this was the best way to run the championships? Box 1, fantastic. Box 2, pretty good. And box 3, yeah, that seemed to work okay. No, box 4, it was a disaster. That's the sort of feedback system. And that's what, you know, you worry about because it's just hard to balance. We've got about 300 or so women. I don't know, look, I'm not sure, but we've got enough women in the club that, you know, they enjoy their golf. They're not opposed to change. They're just opposed to being told without the consultation. And that's where the issues are at most clubs. There's no consultation. You will do it this way. You're not going to have a women's committee. Oops, yes, we are. So,
you'd hate to be the one in charge when you're trying to, because of course you can never get it right. You can never win, no matter what you do. You can never win.
Well, you can't please all
the people. That's right. You know that, and I know that.
But there should be a balance pleasing both males and females, and not just dictating everything towards the male system. Men and women are different. In golf, that's a big difference. Perhaps
that's where we get it wrong, Jane, this notion of, I've spoken to Christian Hamilton about this, the inclusion officer there at Golf Australia, and he has this sort of great little chart or a little image that he shows you of, you know, the differences between equal and same and equal access versus just equality. And there's a lot of stuff around. It's a much more complex, gender politics is a much more complex thing than just, well, if everybody has exactly the same thing, then everybody must be equal, because the same thing doesn't necessarily work for everybody, does it? So
no,
it's not as.
I mean, you look at a certain golf club in New South Wales or Sydney, and you know, a proposal was put to the board by a member of the board, a female member of the board. Women, we can get more women to the club if we can get them time slots on Saturday. No, not going to happen. No, not having women on Saturdays. So it starts at the clubs.
Oh, absolutely. And look, the stupidity of that is just staggering. And there's no sensible case to be made for that. No. Well, clearly we've solved most of the problems, Jane. If only the rest of the world would take the time to listen to us.
Yeah, that's right. Well, nothing will change. That's my belief.
Is this, after 66 years on the planet, this is the bleak outlook that you've come to, is it? That this is the way it is?
I've been waiting, 50 of them.
Yeah. Well, you've been trying, haven't you, to change it?
Yeah. To no avail.
Do you get to a point where you're just tired of having the discussions?
I've got friends that want to talk about it all the time, all the travails of the golf clubs they belong to, and I just go, I've been there, done that, heard it all, same answer. Nothing's going to change. Oh, yes, that'll eventually change. And I said, well, when I was 19, they said that too. Yeah. Nothing's happened.
And
nothing of substance in a positive sense has happened for women. It was going along nicely when they got rid of the status of women being called associates to members, but they still, in emails occasionally and on timesheets, they call it ladies. It's not ladies. It's men and women, and that's important definition because the women fought for a long time to get that changed. Mm-hmm. And there's a stigma attached to that, saying that ladies like, oh, yes, frail, weak. Well, don't you remember, you mightn't, that the only option for golf clubs and bags were pink years and years ago?
No, hey, forget years and years ago. My cousin, who passed just recently, tragically, same age as me, 52, far too young, wonderful woman. As a youngster, loved sport, played cricket, a lot of indoor cricket in particular. Was very good. She had a good arm and she could bat and all the rest of it. Later in life, in her early 40s, I'm going to say about 10 years ago, she developed an interest in golf sort of out of nowhere. So, of course, she turned to me and said, I want to get into this golf business. And off she went to a golf shop. We're literally talking now, not even in the 2000s, in the 2010s.
Oh, God.
And she walked in and was immediately led to a corner where there were pink golf clubs and pink golf bags and told, this is the women's section you choose from here. It's like no one said to her, what do you play off? She could have been a 4 marker.
Yeah.
She could have been better than the bloke trying to sell her the golf clubs.
Oh, it's degrading.
It just,
When you go into any pro shop and...
surprise, she didn't become a golfer.
Hey?
She didn't become a golfer.
Oh,
Of
duh.
course.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Don't blame her. I mean, pink.
Last question, because we've really wandered off track here, though it has been...
Sorry.
No, not at all. It's been nice to vent. What's the future of Jane Locke and golf? You're off it at the moment. You're coming back to it? Have we lost you forever?
I will. When things get back to a reasonable normal, I'll go back to social golf, as I said. But it won't be every, be maybe once a week, if that.
Uh-huh.
But I'm just not interested in the way the courses have been set up, a lot of them. So I'd rather go out to the country, get in the car and just drive along the Murray and play the various courses, that sort of thing.
And do you know what's still wonderful about golf, Jane?
Yeah, what?
You can do that.
Yes.
You don't like what it's like here? Go somewhere else. And here's the thing. If you don't like the modern equipment, don't use it.
That's right.
Pull out a persimmon driver and use that.
Yes.
And that's the wonderful. You can choose to engage at this game at whatever level you like. And so I hope you rediscover the joy in the game, both for the game's sake and for your own. But you've made a magnificent contribution, a fabulous contribution to the game generally and to us here today. And it's been fantastic to catch up with you and talk to you. Thank you for taking some time.
Thank you, Rod.
Well, that's episode 30 done and dusted, and a huge thanks to Jane for being so generous with her time. It really was a treat to finally get to know a little bit more about a player whose name I'd heard so often, but I knew so precious little about. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you'll come back for episode 31, when we'll not only chat to Adelaide golf royalty Wade Ormsby, but we'll also have a special announcement about the show. Very exciting stuff coming up. That's next time on The Thing About Golf.